My name is Celine Harwood, and at 72, I have learned that silence often carries sharper edges than words. I used to fill the quiet with motion baking, polishing, keeping traditions alive, as if consistency could hold a family together. That Thanksgiving, I baked the same pumpkin pie I had baked every year since my husband died. The recipe card was smudged from years of cinnamon stains and small tears. I told myself it was habit, not hope, though. Both felt the same in my hands. The air in Savannah that afternoon was soft and gold-heavy, with that salt-sweet scent from the river. The drive to my son Grant's house took only 20 minutes, long enough for me to rehearse the conversation I wanted to have, the simple kind about weather and gratitude, the ones that sound like peace even when they are fragile. When I turned onto his street, the cars parked outside caught my eye. Too many for family. I recognized Macy's white SUV and several new ones, glossy and expensive. Through the window, I could already see people moving about inside, setting plates, glasses catching the light. I balanced the pie carefully in both hands, smoothing the foil edges. For a moment, I paused on the porch the way I used to, before walking into a classroom full of restless students, just a breath, a gathering. I rang the bell. The door opened, but it wasn't Grant standing there. Macy filled the doorway in a silk blouse the color of champagne. She didn't look surprised to see me. She looked prepared. "Celine," she said, her tone crisp as crystal. "You're not invited this year. We decided to keep it small. You should go home." Behind her, the sound of laughter swelled Grant's voice, among it blurred with others. I saw his sleeve, his hand holding a wine glass, and then he turned slightly away, pretending not to notice. The smell of roasted turkey and sage drifted out warm and cruel. My throat tightened, but I kept my chin level. Years of teaching had taught me the value of composure. No one remembers the quiet teacher until she stops speaking. "I see," I said. The words came evenly, though my hands trembled a little beneath the pie's weight. I stepped back from the threshold and set the pie down on the brick step, centering it neatly as if it still belonged somewhere. The foil crinkled softly. Macy watched me, uncertain whether I would protest. I didn't. I just met her eyes long enough for her to look away first. Turning back toward the driveway, I adjusted my scarf and felt the late afternoon chill brush my neck. The house behind me filled with more laughter, high and echoing, as if a door could erase blood. In the car, the steering wheel felt cool against my palms. I whispered, almost to the pie I had left behind, "All right then." Then I started the engine and drove away toward the river where the light was beginning to fade. The road back along the Savannah River was quiet, except for the low hum of the car and the faint jingle of holiday music leaking from the radio. I let it play because silence felt too close, too personal. The pie's scent still lingered in the car, a mix of cinnamon and shame. I could almost feel it watching me from the seat beside me, warm, unwanted, loyal in its own small way. The sun was sinking, brushing the rooftops in copper. Families were gathering inside the houses. I passed their windows glowing with that same light I had just been shut out from. I pressed my fingers against the steering wheel until my knuckles went pale. Grant used to sit in the passenger seat when he was little, swinging his legs and singing off-key to those same Thanksgiving songs. I could still hear him laughing when we burned the first turkey and ended up eating mashed potatoes and cereal instead. "Best Thanksgiving ever," he had said with a mouthful of sugar. When Macy came along, things changed slowly, too slowly to notice until it was done. The first year she hosted, she asked me to bring something light, so I made my pie. The second year, she said they already had desserts covered. By the fifth, she had replaced every dish I ever made, even my cornbread dressing. She said it was time for new traditions. I remembered that year how she moved my pie to a side table near the trash bin, saying the oven had made it a little too rustic. Grant had laughed, not cruelly, just nervously, the way people laugh when they don't want to take sides. I didn't notice the tears until they blurred the traffic lights into long red ribbons. I wiped them with the back of my wrist and whispered, "You did raise him to be polite. Maybe too polite." When I turned onto my street, the river air shifted. My house waited like an old friend who had stopped expecting company. The azalea bushes out front had lost their blooms, only the dark leaves left. I parked but didn't turn off the engine. My phone sat on the passenger seat beside the empty pie tin I had taken from the porch. I picked it up and scrolled. No messages. No missed calls. Not even a holiday greeting from Grant. The last text from him was from 3 weeks ago. "Can you send the old deed? Macy's updating the files." I thought of that message now and felt something stir, not anger, yet just a kind of alertness, like standing up after sitting too long. I turned off the ignition, but stayed there, the cold creeping in. The house was dark except for one lamp by the window, the one I always left on for company. My husband used to joke that it was for lost souls. Tonight, it was for me. I unlocked the door, went straight to the kitchen, and set the empty tin in the sink. It clinked softly. The sound felt final. Then I poured a cup of tea, though I didn't drink it. My hands needed something to do. I looked at the phone again, still blank. The quiet thickened until it pressed against my chest. Finally, I said it aloud, the truth that had been circling since that doorway. "Then I suppose I'm not family anymore." The words hung there heavy but clean. For the first time that evening, they didn't sting, they settled. Outside, the river wind brushed against the windows and I reached to switch off the lamp. The house disappeared into the kind of darkness that doesn't ask permission. By morning, the kitchen still smelled faintly of pumpkin and burnt sugar. I hadn't slept much. The house had that hollow silence it gets after a long storm quiet, but full of what was left unsaid. I made tea, sat at the table, and looked at the stack of mail I'd been ignoring. On top lay an envelope from the Harwood Design Group, my late husband's firm. The name used to bring pride. Now it brought questions I had put off too long. I dialed David Leland's office number from memory. He'd been my husband's attorney and friend for over 30 years, a man who spoke in precise sentences and always called me Mrs. Harwood, no matter how many times I told him to use my first name. He answered on the third ring. "David Leland." "It's Celine," I said. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Celine," he said warmly. "You're never an interruption. How are you holding up?" I almost laughed. "That depends on whether we're talking personally or financially." He hesitated. "That sounds ominous." "I need you to look into something for me," I said. "The Harwood Design Group, specifically the voting shares my husband left me when he passed. I want to know if anyone else has been touching them." David cleared his throat softly. "You still hold 60%, as you know. Grant and Macy manage operations day to day, but you remain the controlling shareholder." "That's on paper," I said. "In practice, I think they've been using my authority as a formality, signing documents in my name. I want confirmation." There was a pause long enough for me to hear the faint hum of his office air conditioner. "I'd hoped you wouldn't ask that," he finally said. "Because I'd have to tell you the truth." "Tell me." "Yes," he said quietly. "Macy has been signing certain filings for convenience. I assumed it was with your knowledge. She told our accountant you preferred not to deal with paperwork." A slow, steady calm spread through me, the kind that comes when the worst thing has already been said. "So she's been using my signature. In a manner of speaking," he said, "digitally. It's technically legal since you granted administrative access when we updated the bylaws 3 years ago. I believe she meant to streamline things, but convenience has limits," I finished. David exhaled. "Celine, I can initiate a suspension of that authority today. We'll file a notice of rescission, but it will ruffle feathers." "They're already ruffled," I said. "I was turned away from my own family's Thanksgiving dinner yesterday. I think we've passed the stage of politeness." He was silent again, and when he spoke, his voice softened. "I'm sorry, Celine. I know Grant loves you, but Macy, She's ambitious. I'm not angry at ambition, I said. Just theft dressed as efficiency. He gave a short, reluctant chuckle. All right, I'll draft the papers. We'll revoke her access and issue a notification to the bank. You'll receive copies this afternoon. Thank you, I said. And David, make sure the change takes effect immediately. Consider it done. I ended the call and set the phone down on the table. The house felt different, lighter somehow, though nothing had moved. The teacup was still full, untouched steam curling upward like a promise. I looked at the empty chair across from me, the one where my husband used to read the morning paper, and said quietly, "You'd tell me this isn't worth it, that I should let it go." The quiet stayed, but I could almost hear his voice in it, the dry humor he used when life disappointed him. Then again, Celine, you always did grade harder than I did. I smiled a little and reached for my planner. Under the heading, To Do, I wrote 3 words in neat, deliberate letters. End convenience today. Then I folded the page closed and went to fetch my coat. It was time to remind everyone, including myself, whose name was still on the door. By mid-morning, the air in my house carried the sharp scent of brewed coffee and old paper. David called right on time, his voice as steady as the ticking clock on the wall. I've reviewed everything he said. We'll proceed with 3 actions. First, we'll rescind Macy's digital signature authority on all company documents. Second, we'll file a temporary injunction to halt any transfers or new contracts pending review. Third, we'll freeze the corporate expense accounts tied to your authorization. It will be effective at 6 o'clock this evening. His words landed like puzzle pieces finally fitting. You sound like you've done this before, I said. More times than I'd like, he replied. But rarely for someone who actually deserves peace of mind. I'll need your written consent to execute all 3 steps. I'll sign anything you send, I said. Fax or email. And Celine, once it's filed, there'll be calls. Angry ones? I'm ready. He paused. Are you sure? Yes, I said simply. This isn't anger, David. It's maintenance. He chuckled softly, a sound more weary than amused. That's one way to put it. Check your inbox in a few minutes. When the documents arrived, I opened them at the kitchen table. Legal language always sounded colder than it felt, but I read every line carefully. Rescind, enjoin, restrict each word, quiet, decisive, absolute. At the bottom of the first page, my name waited beside a blank line. I signed it in blue ink. Steady hand, full name, Celine M. Harwood. The signature looked unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone I was still becoming. I called David back. It's done. Good. I'll file the notice now, he said. Once the injunction's processed, all company credit cards tied to your authorization will be frozen. That includes the one Macy uses for event expenses. Expect fireworks by dinner time. Let them light up the sky, I said. Celine, if they contact you, don't engage. Refer everything through me. You're within your rights, but people lash out when they lose comfort. Understood. After we hung up, I sat for a while listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The house didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt orderly. Every object seemed to have a reason again. I gathered the signed pages into a neat pile, slipped them into a folder, and placed it beside the phone. Then I walked to the window overlooking the street. The river breeze moved the curtains slow and deliberate like approval. At noon, I decided to drive out to the grocery store, though I didn't need anything. The car smelled faintly of cinnamon and foil. On the passenger seat sat the same pie from yesterday, untouched edges still golden where the sunlight hit. I hadn't realized I'd brought it home after all. For a moment, I just looked at it, the symbol of everything polite and powerless. Then I took out my phone and snapped a photo. The image captured it perfectly, the pie on the seat, a faint reflection of me in the window, hands steady on the wheel. I saved it without a caption. By the time I returned home, the clock read 5:30. The sky outside was beginning to dim, that pale lavender hour when Savannah looks soft enough to forgive anything. I sat by the kitchen phone folder beside me, waiting for David's confirmation. At 6:15, the message came through. All 3 filings complete. Authority restored. Rest easy. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I turned off the lights, sat back in my chair, and let the stillness fill the room. It wasn't silence anymore, it was space. The kind that comes before something changes shape forever. By evening, the neighborhood smelled of roasted meat and brown sugar. I sat in my living room with a cup of tea cooling beside me, the folder from David still on the coffee table. The clock ticked past 6:30. Somewhere across town, Macy's dinner would be in full swing. Out of habit, I opened my phone. My fingers knew where to go before my thoughts caught up. The first photo that appeared was hers, Macy framed perfectly under warm light holding a glass of wine. The caption read, "Friendsgiving only." The words didn't sting right away. They settled first, heavy and slow. I scrolled through the images, the long table set, for 12 gold chargers and linen napkins, flowers, arranged like something from a magazine. My son stood at the far end, smiling, his arm around her waist. He looked thinner. Maybe the camera, maybe the guilt. In the next photo, something small caught my eye, a chair on the corner of the frame. White oak curved back, a faint scratch on the top rail. My chair. The one I'd given them 6 years ago when they moved into that house. I had said it belonged to your grandmother. Keep it for special meals. And now it sat there filled by someone I didn't know. Her face half turned toward the camera, laughing. I set the phone down on the table. The sound of it meeting the wood was sharper than I expected. The kettle clicked off behind me. I poured water into the same teacup I'd used all day, added a spoon of sugar, and stirred until the liquid turned the color of caramel. The small sound of the spoon against porcelain felt steadying. A soft knock startled me. It was Laurel, my neighbor from 2 doors down, holding a small dish covered with foil. "I thought you might not have company tonight," she said, her voice gentle. I opened the door wider. "You guessed right." She stepped inside, glancing at the half-drunk tea. "I made stuffing. Old family recipe. Too much for one person." "That's usually how recipes work," I said, managing a faint smile. She placed it on the counter. "You look calm. I'd be throwing plates." "Maybe later," I said. "For now, I'm observing. Observing what the difference between noise and warmth." Laurel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "You always did have the better words." She squeezed my arm before heading back to her porch, leaving behind the faint scent of sage and butter. When she was gone, I sat again, the tea cooling beside me. The quiet of the house didn't ache anymore. It sounded deliberate, like a held breath before music begins. I picked up my phone one last time and opened Macy's post again. My thumb hovered over the screen, the small heart icon glowing faintly. I didn't press it. I just looked at that table, my chair, my son, the friends who weren't family, and then closed the app. The phone slipped into the drawer beside the legal papers. I reached for my cup, stirred it once more, and murmured into the steam, "Let's see who owns the table now." The words weren't bitter, just even. Like the calm that follows a verdict you already knew was coming. Outside, laughter drifted faintly from other houses layered with clinking dishes and holiday songs. It reached my window, then faded into the night, leaving only the slow rhythm of the spoon in my cup and the quiet certainty that something somewhere had just shifted. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too still. My thoughts too loud. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Macy's hand on the door, that polite little smile that said, "You don't belong here anymore." So I went to my desk by the window, turned on the lamp, and opened my laptop. The cursor blinked at me, expectant. I hadn't written anything longer than a grocery list in years, but my fingers remembered how to begin. I started with a title, "The Mother Left on the Porch." Then I began to type slowly at first, then faster, as if the words had been waiting. It was Thanksgiving. The house glowed like a magazine spread, perfect lighting, perfect people, perfect silence. I brought a pie, the same kind I've baked for 40 years. At the door, my daughter-in-law smiled and said, "You're not invited. Go home." I paused, reread the lines, then continued. No shouting, no tears. Just the smell of turkey and sage floating between us while my son stood behind her and pretended to check his phone. I set the pie down on the step, because even rejection deserves good manners. Then I drove away. The more I wrote, the less it felt like revenge, and the more it felt like breathing. I didn't name them. I didn't need to. Anyone who had ever been dismissed kindly would understand. I described the drive, the river light, the radio, the pie cooling beside me. The moment I whispered, "All right then," the way silence filled the car like a second passenger. When I finished, I sat back and read it once from beginning to end. My heart slowed to match the rhythm of the sentences. It wasn't polished, but it was true. I hesitated before sending it. Then I remembered something David had mentioned once years ago when we'd met after my husband's funeral. His daughter Elise had started a local journal called Savannah Voices, a place for community stories. I searched the site, found her email, and typed, "Hello, Elise. You may not remember me. I'm Celine Harwood. I have a small piece I'd like to submit. Anonymous, please. Thank you for reading." I attached the file and pressed send. The click of the button sounded final, like a door closing behind me. But this time, I was the one who closed it. For the first time in days, I felt calm enough to make tea. While the kettle boiled, I noticed my reflection in the window, hair loose, face lined but alive. I whispered, "That will do." The email reply came 2 hours later, long after midnight. Mrs. Harwood, "Your piece moved me deeply. We'll publish it tomorrow morning in our Thanksgiving edition. It deserves to be read." I stared at the screen, my throat tightening. She'd used my real name in the greeting, but promised anonymity in the byline. That was enough. I shut down the computer, finished my tea, and left the mug unwashed. The air smelled faintly of lemon and ink. When I finally went to bed, the sheets felt cool, clean, like a reset. By dawn, I was awake again. Habit. I made breakfast, read a few pages of an old book, and didn't check my phone until late morning. The message from Elise was short. "It's live." I opened the link. My words sat there in black and white. No name, just submitted by a resident of Savannah. I read the piece once more. Then I read it again, not as the writer, but as someone else entirely. Someone who had been waiting to be seen. It was strange, the peace that followed. No fireworks, no noise. Just a quiet certainty that I had finally spoken in my own language, truth told plainly without bitterness or apology. I closed the laptop and let the silence settle around me. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. By morning, my inbox had turned into a tide. The story had traveled faster than I'd imagined. The mother left on the porch had been shared dozens of times across Savannah Voices, reposted by local readers who called it brave, familiar, long overdue. I scrolled through the comments, my tea untouched beside me. This happened to me. Families call it tradition when they mean control. Thank you for saying what we never could. Each line felt like a quiet hand on my shoulder. No names, no pity, just recognition. Then came the sharper ones. Sounds like bitterness in disguise. People love playing victim when they're no longer relevant. I smiled faintly at those. The internet was no different from a dinner table. Some spoke to understand, others to be right. I kept reading until a message popped up in the corner of the screen. Laurel Payne. I recognized the name, my neighbor, 2 doors down. I'd seen her walking her dog, always polite, but reserved, the kind of widow who waved without expecting an answer. Her message was short. "I think you're the one who wrote it. You're not alone." I stared at the words. She didn't sound like she was guessing. She sounded sure. I hesitated before typing back. What makes you think that? Her reply came almost instantly. The pie. You mentioned burnt edges. You gave me one like that last year when my sister was in hospice. No one else in this neighborhood bakes them that way. I let out a breath, half a laugh. Then yes. It's me. Another pause, then she wrote. It was beautiful. I wish I'd had the courage to write mine. I typed, then erased 3 replies before settling on, You don't have to write it. You can just tell it. She responded, Would you mind if I came by? I'll bring the lemon biscuits. I read that line twice, surprised by how much warmth it carried. Come around 4, I answered. We'll have tea. At 4 on the dot, she knocked softly. Her hair was pulled back, her hands holding a small tin that smelled of butter and sugar. You really wrote it? She said as soon as I opened the door. I did, I said. And now half of Savannah knows it too. Laurel laughed, not loud but real. It made me cry, she said. When you wrote about setting the pie down, I thought about the night my brother-in-law told me not to visit the hospital anymore. He said I made the patients uncomfortable. I left without arguing, but I've regretted my silence ever since. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd signed the papers days before. The air smelled of black tea and lemon. I didn't think people would care, I admitted. They care, she said quietly. Because you didn't make it about blame. You made it about loss. For a long while, neither of us spoke. She broke a biscuit in half and slid a piece across the table. You know, she said finally, I think you started something. People will remember this. I looked at her, surprised by the word remember. It felt heavier than fame, softer than forgiveness. When she left the house, didn't feel as empty. Her tin sat on the counter, the lid still warm. I washed the teacups, dried them carefully, and thought of all the voices still echoing online, unseen faces, unseen stories, and how somehow they sounded closer than the laughter from my son's dining room had ever been. The call came just after 6 that evening. I had been folding laundry when the phone rang, the air heavy with the faint scent of lavender detergent. Celine David said, his tone clipped but steady. It's done. The injunction is active. Macy and Grant have been notified. As of this minute, all transactions requiring your signature are frozen. I pressed the fabric in my hands flat against the table. So if she tries to use the company card, it'll decline, he said. And any auto payments tied to it will flag for review by morning. Good, I said quietly. He hesitated. I'll admit I don't usually enjoy watching this part, but in your case, I think I might. Thank you, David, I said, and hung up. I didn't pace, didn't celebrate. I just stood still, hands resting on the folded towel, breathing evenly. Through the window, the river's reflection caught the last bit of daylight. The world went on unaware of the shift that had just occurred. Then my phone buzzed again, this time a message from Laurel. Are you seeing this? I frowned, opened the link she sent. It led to a local community stream, one of those casual neighborhood videos people post when they see something loud. The title read, Drama at the Harwood Thanksgiving Bash. I turned up the sound. The image shook, but the voices were unmistakable. Macy's sharp and rising. What do you mean it declined? She snapped. Run it again. A man's voice, Grant's, murmured something I couldn't make out. The catering manager, polite but firm. Ma'am, the card was declined twice. Do you have another method of payment? I just used it this morning, she shouted. There must be a mistake. My husband owns this company. Grant tried to step in. Mace just let me call someone. But the camera caught her turning on him, voice trembling now. Don't you dare act calm. This is your mother's doing. A plate shattered in the background. People began murmuring, some pretending not to listen, others filming. The scene had the rhythm of a play losing its script. I lowered the phone, set it face down on the table, and looked out the window. The reflection of the lamplight blurred against the glass, soft and gold. For the first time in a long while, my hands weren't shaking. I could hear my husband's voice in memory from years ago when we'd once faced a difficult client who refused to pay. Sometimes fairness sounds like thunder, he'd said, but it clears the air. I exhaled slowly, letting that truth settle. Another buzz. Laurel again. Half the neighborhood's talking. You okay? I typed back. Fine. Just watching the weather change. She replied with a single emoji. One of those small hearts that somehow mean, I see you. I turned off the phone, poured myself a small glass of water, and sat by the window. The night outside shimmered faintly with the kind of quiet that comes after noise breaks. Somewhere across town, Macy was probably shouting into another phone, Grant trying to calm her, both of them, realizing the ground beneath them had finally stopped belonging to them. I didn't feel triumphant, only balanced. I rested my palm flat on the cool tabletop, tracing the grain of the wood like a signature. The air felt clear again, almost kind. The folded towel still sat where I'd left it, neat and ordinary. I placed it on the shelf, turned off the light, and let the calm finish what the law had started. 2 days passed before Grant came by. I knew it was him the moment I heard the slow knock, polite, rehearsed, the sound of someone trying to appear calm while standing on uncertain ground. I opened the door. He looked smaller somehow, though his suit was pressed and his tie knotted too tight. The kind of careful dressing men do when they've already lost something and don't want to show it. Mom, he said, forcing a thin smile. Can we talk? I stepped aside. You can try. He walked in, glancing around as if expecting a courtroom. His eyes paused on the folder still sitting on my coffee table, the one labeled Harwood Design Group. He didn't ask about it. He already knew. You didn't have to humiliate us, he said finally. I met his eyes. I didn't. You did the moment you let her close the door. He flinched, a small tightening near his jaw. You're twisting it. It wasn't like that. How was it then? I asked, voice steady. She wanted a quieter holiday, less stress. We thought you'd rather I cut him off. You thought I'd rather be alone on Thanksgiving after 40 years of hosting you, after your father died. Who exactly did you think I cooked for? He looked down. I didn't know she'd say it that way. But she did, I said. And you watched. His silence filled the room, heavier than shouting would have. I could hear the clock ticking between us. I was trying to keep peace, he said at last. She's been under pressure work, the firm expectations. You know how she gets when things feel out of control. I folded my hands on the table. I know how control looks when it isn't hers. You think I don't recognize it? He sighed, rubbing his forehead. You've always made things about principle. This could have been handled quietly. It was quiet, I said. Until you forced it into the light. He looked up sharply. You froze the accounts, Mom. People are talking. You made us look like what I asked, like the truth. Grant's mouth opened, then closed. He started pacing like he used to when he forgot his lines in a school play. You don't understand how much damage this causes. The firm, our name, I repeated. Your father built that name on integrity. If Macy turned it into a prop, that's not damage. That's correction. He stopped, shoulders dropping. I just wish you'd told me before you did it. You had 2 days, I said quietly. You didn't call. You waited until the noise died down, then came to see if I'd undo it. He sank onto the couch, elbows on his knees. I never wanted this fight. Then you shouldn't have let it start on my porch. His eyes flickered, a child's guilt trapped behind a man's exhaustion. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The house was so still, I could hear the wind brushing against the window. He finally stood. I'll fix it, he said, though his voice carried no certainty. I already did, I replied. Grant looked at me, wanting something softer, but I had nothing left to give that wouldn't cost my dignity. He nodded once, tight and small, then walked to the door. You're still my mother, he said quietly. I know, I said. You just forgot for a while. When the door closed, I stayed where I was, listening to his footsteps fade down the porch steps. The silence that followed wasn't cruel. It was clean, like the air after a storm that finally told the truth. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, tucked inside a plain envelope with David's name printed neatly in the corner. It had the weight of something final. I made myself finish pouring coffee before opening it. Old habits control the small things when the big ones threaten to tilt. Then I slid a finger beneath the flap and unfolded the pages. At the top, the company's letterhead. Below, David's signature. The rest, in careful legal phrasing, read like a quiet confession. This document confirms full restoration of ownership and decision-making rights to Mrs. Celine Harwood. All prior authorizations granted to Grant Harwood and Macy Harwood are hereby revoked, effective immediately. I read the sentence twice. Then again, slower, to feel its balance. It didn't shout. It didn't gloat. It simply stood. I called David. He answered on the first ring. "I assume you've seen the letter," he said. "I have," I replied. I wanted to hear it from a voice, not a page. He chuckled softly. "It's done, Celine. Every document filed, every signature logged. You hold full authority again. Grant and Macy have been formally removed from the board." I let the silence breathe a moment before speaking. "It's strange," I said. "You'd think this would feel like victory, but it feels more like balance restored." "That's exactly what it is," he said. "You've just taken back your name." I smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. "Then let's not raise our voices about it." David hesitated. "For what it's worth, I've known you through worse storms. You always manage to stay dignified when most would burn the house down." "I've thought about burning it," I said, half laughing. "But then I'd have to rebuild it myself." He laughed, the warm, tired kind of sound old friends share. "Well, you've rebuilt plenty already. Take a breath today. Let the ink dry." After we hung up, I sat by the window with the letter on my lap. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, but not from fear. Just release. The phone buzzed again, an email notification from the firm's main account. The subject line read, "Board Update Confirmation." I opened it, and there it was, my name listed alone at the top, beside the title, Primary Owner. A line below, Status of Harwood Design Group, Active Unencumbered. I stared at those words until they blurred. Then I leaned back in my chair, exhaling for what felt like the first real time in years. A knock came at the door. Laurel's voice followed soft through the frame. "I brought muffins. Thought you might need company." I let her in. She placed the small paper bag on the counter and poured herself tea as if she'd lived here all her life. "You look lighter," she said. "Maybe I am," I answered. "Paperweight lighter," she smiled. "Good kind of light, the best kind. The kind you can stand under." She nodded, sensing enough but not to ask for details. We sat together, the letter between us on the table, neither of us speaking for a while. When she left, I folded the document and placed it in the drawer beside my husband's watch. Not as a trophy, just where things of quiet worth belong. Outside, the afternoon light stretched thin over the street. I closed the drawer gently and pressed my palm against it once steady. No one else would hear the sound of it, but to me, it was the soft click of something locking perfectly into place. It was just after dusk when the knock came. Not the polite kind this time, but sharp, urgent, insistent. I didn't need to look through the window to know who it was. The rhythm carried entitlement. When I opened the door, Macy stood there first, Grant half a step behind her. Their faces looked carved, hers with fury, his with exhaustion. Celine Macy said, her voice clipped. "We need to talk." I stepped aside, wordless. They walked in, as if the place still belonged to them. The air shifted thick with the smell of Macy's perfume, and something colder underneath fear, maybe. She didn't waste a second. "You destroyed our reputation," she said. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The firm's calls won't stop. Clients are panicking. Reporters are circling. You've made us look like thieves. I met her gaze steadily. You built your reputation on borrowed kindness. All I did was take mine back. Grant's eyes flickered toward me. Mom, please, this isn't helping. I turned to him. I'm not trying to help. I'm telling the truth. Macy crossed her arms. Truth. You humiliated us publicly, and for what? A few documents you could have come to us like an adult instead of playing victim. An adult, I repeated softly. You turned me away at my own family's door. You called it a smaller dinner, a quieter holiday. And then you called my silence a problem. Tell me, Macy, which version of adulthood do you mean? Grant shifted, rubbing his temple. Stop, both of you. We can fix this if we just… No, I interrupted. You can't fix what you don't believe is broken. Macy took a step forward, voice tightening. You've ruined everything your husband built. Do you think people respect a company that freezes its own funds out of spite? Spite, I said. No. That was preservation. You used his name to fund parties and personal expenses. You made me a ghost in my own legacy. Grant's voice broke through low but trembling. I didn't know half of it, Mom. I swear, I thought it was all approved. Because she told you it was, I said, and you didn't want to ask questions that might cost you dinner. He opened his mouth, but Macy turned on him first. Are you seriously taking her side? I'm not taking sides, he said, voice rising. I'm just trying to see this clearly. Clearly, Macy snapped. She's manipulating you. This is what she's always done, guilt and control. I almost laughed, not from humor, but from disbelief. I controlled nothing, Macy. You had the bank accounts, the board, the house, and my son's loyalty. I had a pie and a front porch. Grant looked between us, something dawning in his expression, a crack in the fog he'd lived in. Mace, he said quietly, stop talking. She turned, startled. Excuse me, he exhaled. You don't see it. You don't even hear yourself. Macy's lips thinned. If you want to stand here and let her destroy what we've worked for, be my guest. I think I said, stepping toward the door, this conversation has worked itself to death. Grant hesitated, eyes still on me. There was something like apology there, but no words to match it. Macy brushed past him, her heels sharp against the floor. You'll regret this, she said. I already did, I answered. They left without another glance. I closed the door behind them and turned the lock. Not hard, not angry, just certain. For a long moment I stood there listening to their footsteps fade down the path. The house felt still, again, not empty but reclaimed. I ran a hand over the doorframe, the smooth wood cool under my palm. It was strange, the calm that followed. No triumph, no bitterness. Just peace, quiet and whole, the kind you earn when the noise finally walks away. A week passed before the envelope came. Plain white, no return address, but I knew that handwriting anywhere. Grant's. He had his father's neat, deliberate script, the kind that looked measured even when his thoughts weren't. It was late afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting bills when I saw it at the bottom of the stack. My first instinct was to set it aside, pretend it was just another formality. But the weight of it made me pause. I reached for a letter opener and sliced the edge clean. Inside a single sheet. No greeting. No signature at the bottom. Just his name, Grant. I let her speak for me because I thought silence meant peace. I see now it only meant surrender. When she said those words at the door, I told myself it was just a moment, that you'd forgive us like you always did. I was wrong. You didn't owe us forgiveness. You owed yourself better. I stopped reading and laid the paper flat on the table. My throat tightened. The kettle began to whistle, faint and distant, but I didn't move to turn it off. I kept reading. I don't know how to repair what we broke, and I'm not asking you to. I just need you to know that when I looked at you that night, I saw fear in myself. Fear of confrontation, of choosing between my wife and my mother. I thought keeping quiet would keep everything steady, but it didn't. It cost me both steadiness and you. I pressed my hand against the letter as if the words might stop moving under my fingertips. Macy says I've humiliated her by apologizing, but she doesn't understand. There's no humiliation in admitting truth. You were right. Peace built on silence is cowardice. I'm sorry I made you carry the weight of my absence. The words blurred for a second. I blinked hard and leaned back in the chair, staring at the small pile of mail, still unopened, beside me. He had written it in blue ink, not typed, not rehearsed. There were even a few cross-outs, the kind that came from thinking too hard about the right word. At the bottom of the page, a final line. If you ever want to talk, I'll come to you. No one else. Just me. I read it again, slower this time, tracing the loops in his handwriting. He'd written the M in Mom, and then crossed it out before signing his name. The kettle had gone quiet. I stood, turned off the burner, and returned to the table. I folded the letter once, then again, and slid it carefully into the drawer beside my husband's cufflinks. They were heavy silver, shaped like small squares he used to wear them to board meetings, his quiet badge of patience. I touched them lightly, then closed the drawer. The soft click echoed in the stillness. No phone calls came after that. No follow-up message or apology. He didn't need to repeat himself, and I didn't need to answer. The words were enough, plain, steady, unfinished. The house felt different that evening. The air carried a warmth that wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but something near it, the slow unfreezing of distance. I set the kettle back on the stove, poured a new cup of tea, and sat by the window as the sun dipped below the river's edge. The steam curled upward, silent and soft, the way regret sometimes sounds, before it turns into something else. Winter came early that year with the kind of cold that made the river look like glass. I found myself waking up earlier than usual, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There was something steady in the way morning light crept across the kitchen counter. Laurel had convinced me to join her neighborhood reading group. It's nothing formal, she'd said. Just a handful of us talking more than we read. The first meeting was in her living room. A small fire crackled, and the scent of oranges and cloves filled the air. There were 5 of us, all women around my age, each with a story disguised as a hobby. One had lost her husband, another her eyesight in one eye. One simply said she'd lost interest in pretending. Laurel introduced me. This is Celine. She writes. I wrote once, I corrected. Laurel smiled. Same thing. The others nodded, their kindness unforced. I sat back, listened more than I spoke. The book we were meant to discuss, something about second chances, turned into a conversation about what we'd each chosen to start over with. When it was my turn, I said I started with a pie, and it ended with a paper trail. They laughed gently, not at me, but with the recognition that starting small often means something larger waiting underneath. After the meeting, Laurel walked me home. The night air smelled faintly of salt from the river. You know, she said you should come help me with the garden next week. I can't tell a weed from a tulip in winter. I'm not sure I can either, I said. Then we'll learn to guess together. So I did. Her backyard was mostly soil and stubborn roots. We pulled out what was dead trimmed, what still had a pulse. My husband used to call these my survivors, she said, brushing dirt from her gloves. They hang on even when they shouldn't. I looked down at the small patch of green near my feet. Maybe that's all any of us do. She smiled sideways. That sounds like something your article would have said. I'm trying to stop writing about the past, I told her. Then plant something that belongs to the future, she said. We spent the rest of the afternoon in companionable silence, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. When the work was done, Laurel handed me a small potted cutting. It's rosemary, she said. Put it by your window. It forgives neglect. At home, I set the plant on the sill above the sink. The leaves brushed the glass each time the wind rattled the frame, soft enough to sound like breathing. Later that week, the reading group met again, this time at my house. I baked lemon scones and used the teacups I hadn't taken out since my husband's memorial. The women noticed. You've got good china for someone who claims not to entertain one of them, said. Maybe I just forgot how I replied. By the end of the evening, laughter filled the kitchen. Laurel caught my eye as she left and said, "See, the house likes company." When everyone was gone, I washed the dishes slowly, one by one. The sound of water felt peaceful, deliberate. No noise, no demands, just motion. The rosemary plant caught a bit of the moonlight through the window. I reached out and touched it, the scent rising sharp and clean. The quiet of my home felt different now. It wasn't the quiet of being shut out. It was the quiet of being full enough not to need filling. I poured myself one last cup of tea and sat at the table. The same place where I'd once signed papers, read letters, and faced every small ending. Now it was just a table. Again. Plain wood steady mine. Outside, the air carried a promise of frost. Inside, I let the warmth stay a little longer. Some things I'd learned don't need to bloom to mean they've survived. By early November, the air in Savannah had turned crisp, the kind that makes paper smell sweeter when ink touches it. I sat at the dining table one morning with a stack of cream-colored cards in front of me, the kind I used to keep for thank you notes. My hands hovered over the first one for a long time before I began to write. "You are warmly invited to Thanksgiving dinner at my home. Those who bring warmth are welcome. No names, no titles, no explanations, just that." I signed it with my full name, Celine Harwood, then pressed the edge of the envelope to seal it. Laurel would be first, of course. Then the women from the reading group. Then Mr. Howard, the widower, down the street, who always walked his dog alone. I even included the young couple who had just moved into the yellow house across from the park. I didn't think of Grant or Macy while I wrote, not out of spite, but because the act of not writing their names felt clean, uncomplicated. Laurel came by that afternoon and caught me with ink on my fingers. "You look like a woman plotting a small revolution," she said. "Maybe I am," I answered. "A polite one. With pie." She sat down grinning. "You're hosting Thanksgiving, I am, and who's coming? Anyone who wants to be here for the right reasons." Laurel nodded slowly. "That's the best guest list I've ever heard." She helped me address envelopes while the kettle hissed on the stove. Every few minutes, she glanced over with that knowing smile she carried, the one that made conversation optional. "I was thinking of making rosemary bread," she said after a while, "to match the plant you've managed to keep alive." "It's still breathing," I said. "That's something." She laughed softly. "It's thriving, Celine Hun. You just don't want to admit it." When she left, the table was covered in small stacks of envelopes. I ran my hand over them, feeling the raised texture of each seal. They looked fragile but certain, like beginnings pretending to be letters. The next morning, I walked them down to the postbox near the corner cafe. I slid each envelope through the slot one at a time, hearing the faint whisper of paper against metal. The sound reminded me of church bells, quiet and sure. Later that week, the replies began to arrive. Laurel, of course, wrote back immediately, "I'll bring bread and laughter from Mrs. Bell, the retired teacher. I haven't had somewhere to go in years. Thank you for asking." Even the young couple replied, "We'd love to join. We can bring dessert, though it might come in a box." Each note carried a little warmth with it, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to be felt. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I stood in the kitchen with a grocery list spread across the counter. Laurel called from her porch. "You're making too much food," she said, watching me unload bags from the car. "Old habits," I said. "I like leftovers." She stepped closer, her scarf fluttering in the wind. "This is going to be good for you, not the food, the people." "People are harder to keep warm than ovens," I said, smiling. "You've got the right ingredients," she replied, and patted my arm before heading home. That night, I sat by the window with the rosemary plant beside me, the same one she'd given me months earlier. I trimmed a sprig and held it to my nose. The scent was sharp, clean, forgiving. I thought about how long it had taken me to write those invitations, how much of my life I'd spent waiting for others to open their doors. Now I was opening mine, not wide enough to lose myself, but enough to let in what was good. Before going to bed, I placed the final envelope on the counter. It wasn't for delivery. It was for me. On the front, I'd written, "For next year, if courage allows." The house was quiet as I turned off the lights, the kind of quiet that used to ache. Now it just rested around me like a quilt stitched from new threads. Tomorrow, I would polish the silver set the table and bake the pie, again burnt edges and all. And maybe when everyone arrived, the laughter would sound a little like forgiveness, finding its own seat. 600 words. Thanksgiving morning came soft and gold, like the one before, but quieter, lighter. My house smelled of cinnamon and roast chicken instead of nerves. I had set the table early, the same oak table that had once held silence like a punishment. This year, it held plates, laughter, and the hum of something new. Laurel arrived first, knocking once before letting herself in. "If you're still cooking, I brought reinforcements," she said, lifting a pie box from her arms. "I told you I had dessert handled," I said. "You did," she said, "but mine's prettier." We laughed, a sound that didn't need to hide behind politeness. I took the box and placed it beside my own pie edges, burnt just the way my husband had liked them. Next came the young couple from across the park, Eli and Nora, newly married, and still uncertain how to carry themselves in other people's homes. Nora held a bottle of wine like a peace offering. "I wasn't sure if this would go with chicken," she said, blushing. "It'll go with company," I said. They smiled, relaxing. Laurel poured them glasses while I finished stirring the gravy. The house buzzed softly, the kind of noise that feels earned. We sat down together, and for a moment, no one spoke. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was full, like everyone knew what this meant without needing words. Laurel broke it first. "Well," she said, lifting her glass, "here's to second chances and good pies." Eli laughed. "And burnt ones," he added. I raised my glass too, especially burnt ones. Dinner moved easily, conversation weaving between recipes and small stories. Nora talked about her mother's failed attempt at cranberry sauce. Laurel teased Eli about his cautious way of cutting chicken as if it might fight back. There was no performance, no invisible script to follow. Halfway through, I noticed the extra chair at the end of the table. I hadn't planned to leave it empty. It just seemed right when I set the table that morning. I'd folded a linen napkin on it out of habit, then decided to keep it that way. Laurel caught me glancing at it. "Saving a seat?" she asked quietly. "For lessons learned," I said. She nodded, understanding without pressing. "It looks good there." As the evening softened, I brought out both pies. Laurel's crust gleamed perfectly golden. Mine was darker at the edges, cracked in the middle, uneven as always. When I placed it on the table, Eli said, "That one looks like it's been through something." "It has," I said. "But it's still sweet." Laughter rippled again, gentle and real. After dessert, Laurel helped me wash dishes while the young couple lingered in the living room, whispering to each other like people who hadn't yet learned that comfort doesn't need volume. When everything was clean and the last cup had been rinsed, Laurel leaned against the counter and said, "You did it, you know. You turned it around. I didn't turn anything I said. I just stopped standing outside." She smiled, drying her hands. "Same thing." When everyone left, I walked them to the door, the night air cool and steady. The moon hung low above the trees, silvering the street. I could hear their laughter fade as they crossed the lawn. Back inside, the house still carried warmth, the kind that stays when no one's performing for it. I looked again at the empty chair and nodded once, not in sadness, but in acknowledgement. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and rosemary. I sat down, poured myself one last glass of wine, and let the quiet settle. It wasn't the silence of being forgotten anymore. It was the silence of belonging, steady and whole. The night after Thanksgiving lingered like a soft hum. Laurel's laughter still echoed faintly in the walls, and the smell of cinnamon clung to the curtains. The dishes were stacked neatly, the table cleared except for the candle that had burned itself low. I didn't turn on the lights. The dim glow was enough warm forgiving. I poured myself a small glass of wine and sat by the window. Outside, the river lights flickered in the distance, reflected in the glass like tiny confessions. My phone sat beside the glass, silent for hours. I hadn't expected anything. Peace felt complete without interruption. Then close to midnight it buzzed. Once. Softly. I looked down. Grant. No words, just a photo. A pie. Pumpkin. The crust, uneven edges, darkened nearly to black. It was resting on a counter I recognized his kitchen. There was flour dusting the edge of the frame like he'd tried to clean it and stopped halfway. No caption. For a moment, I just stared. My throat tightened before I could stop it. I brought the phone closer, my thumb hovering over the image. The pie looked exactly like mine, not the perfect kind Macy used to order from the catering company, but the kind made by hand from memory. I could see him standing there, the kitchen light low. Maybe the smell of burnt crust rising just as it used to when he was little and begged to scrape the edges with a spoon. The memory arrived uninvited. The old kitchen, the radio playing softly. My husband at the sink teasing me. "You burn it every year, Celine. Maybe that's your secret ingredient." And Grant small and bright-eyed laughing between us. "Then don't fix it, Mom. It tastes like home." I hadn't thought about that night in years. The screen dimmed. I tapped it awake, still looking at the image, and whispered, "That's how your father liked it." The words left my mouth without planning, soft, but certain, like a ritual. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The message had said everything it could without a single word. The house was quiet again, but not empty. The silence held the shape of something mending. I set the phone face down on the table and leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of that photo settle into me. Not heavy, just real. After a while, I stood and walked to the kitchen. The scent of roasted chicken still lingered, faint but warm. I found my pie dish on the counter, still with one slice left. The edges were burnt too. I smiled and cut a small piece, set it on a plate, and carried it to the table. For a moment, I imagined my husband sitting across from me, his familiar nod, his quiet approval. Then Grant at the end of the table, older, now still learning. The image didn't hurt. It felt whole, like memory had stopped demanding to be fixed. I took a bite of the pie. It was sweeter than I remembered, the bitterness of the burnt crust balancing the soft center. The taste brought back years I'd stopped visiting, not because they hurt, but because they'd belonged to a time I thought was gone. I looked toward the phone again. Still no new messages. It didn't matter. The distance between us had shifted, not closed, but softened. I finished the slice, rinsed the plate, and left it in the sink to dry. When I turned off the light, the house glowed faintly with the scent of cinnamon and forgiveness. Before heading to bed, I picked up the rosemary plant from the window. Its leaves brushed my hand, releasing a sharp, living scent. I placed it beside the candle stub and smiled. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even reconciliation in the usual sense. It was recognition, quiet, complete, and more powerful for its stillness. Upstairs, I left my phone on the nightstand, the screen still showing the pie with burnt edges. The last light in the room came from it, steady and warm like a flame refusing to die out. A year passed quietly, as if the world had agreed to move at my pace for once. The seasons rolled through Savannah in their soft rhythm, spring rain, summer heat, and the long hush of autumn giving way to winter again. I turned 73 in early December. Laurel insisted on cooking dinner, but I told her the kitchen still knew my hands better than anyone else's. She arrived at dusk, her hair tucked under a wool hat, carrying a basket of herbs and a bottle of wine. "Happy birthday, you stubborn woman," she said, kissing my cheek. "I'm consistent," I replied. "It's one of my finer flaws." Two of my neighbors joined us, Mrs. Bell, who'd once taught English at the local high school, and Mr. Howard the widower from down the street. They brought cornbread and laughter, both slightly overdone in the best way. The house smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, and though the walls still carried echoes of last year's silence tonight, they hummed with the sound of people who had chosen to be there. We set the table together, 4 plates, silver polished glasses, catching the warm light from the candles, and 1 extra chair, empty, its napkin folded neatly with a small card tucked beneath the edge. In black ink, I'd written the words, "For lessons learned." Laurel noticed it first. "You're keeping a seat again." "Yes," I said, smoothing the linen. "Some habits deserve to stay, if only as reminders." She nodded, her expression soft. "You could have filled it." "I did," I said, "just not with anyone's body." Mrs. Bell raised her glass. To the woman who finally let herself sit down. We all laughed, though the sound trembled with something deeper, acknowledgement, maybe gratitude. Dinner moved gently. Conversation wandered from books to neighborhood gossip, to which flowers had survived the early frost. Every so often, my eyes drifted to the empty chair. It didn't ache anymore. It simply was a space that had earned its peace. Halfway through dessert, Laurel leaned forward. "You know," she said, "this feels like the kind of evening you write about. Simple but sacred." "I think life only looks sacred when it stops pretending to be grand," I said. She smiled. "Then you've made it holy, Celine." The word made me laugh softly. "I'll settle for whole." Outside, a breeze stirred the curtains. The air smelled faintly of the river and rain. Mr. Howard poured more wine and told a story about how his wife used to leave notes in his lunch bag, one for every day of the year. "I found one after she passed," he said, voice low. "It just said, 'Don't forget to laugh.'" I took it as a command. Laurel touched his hand briefly. "She'd be proud that you still do." "I think she'd be proud of all of us," I said quietly. "We're still here, still learning to fill the quiet without letting it swallow us." They smiled at that. We ate the last of the pie, Laurel's, this time golden and perfect, though I teased her that mine would have been darker at the edges. When the plates were cleared and the candles burned low, I reached for my glass again. "Before you go," I said, "I want to say something." They looked at me, waiting. The light flickered across their faces. Steady, warm, trusting. "I spent a long time thinking respect was something you could demand," I said slowly. "That if you gave enough, others would return it like a promise. But I've learned respect isn't a trade. It's a reflection. It doesn't expire with age. It only deepens for those who earn it." Laurel raised her glass. "First," her voice quiet, "to respect then. To lessons learned," Mrs. Bell added. "To laughter," said Mr. Howard. I lifted mine last. "To decency," I said. We clinked glasses softly, the sound small but sure. When they left, I walked them to the porch, hugged each one, and watched their silhouettes fade down the street beneath the glow of the lamplight. The night was cool, the air clean with the scent of rosemary from the garden. Back inside, I blew out the last candle and looked at the table, the dishes stacked, crumbs scattered, the folded napkins still resting on that one empty chair. I touched the card lightly, tracing the words with my finger. The house was quiet again, but this time it was not an echo. It was presence, the kind that lingers because it has nowhere better to be. I poured myself a final sip of wine, sat down at my place, and breathed in the peace I had built from every silence before it. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. It just sits quietly in the seat you kept for decency.